Okay. Whew, that worked. I couldn't unmute myself. Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the late start. Um, we're here to discuss Roe versus Wade through the eyes of our Torah texts. So let me first preface the actual presentation by saying that this is not a sheer on constitutional law or on deciding what the Supreme Court should rule. For a Torah observant Jew, there are two separate issues that need to be addressed. One issue is what is our quote unquote internal, or that is our Torah based position on abortion? And then the second question would be, does this position have any ramifications on the current political debate? Now, I'm here to discuss the first question, the question of what is our internal Torah-based position. The second question hinges on the first, because if the halachic quote-unquote internal position is that abortion is never permitted except when the mother's life is at stake, so we have no particular parochial interest in Roe versus Wade, and it becomes a question of should we be advocating our values to society at large. But if our internal position is more permissive than then the broader question of Roe versus Wade becomes of our interest to us practically and parochially as well, because we would not want society to bar access to procedures that we hold to be permissible. So we'll try to present the classical sources upon which the poskim have based their different views. And I'm going to bring the source sheet up here. Okay. Now, see if I can make it a little larger. Yeah, very good. Okay. So let's begin with the actual text of the Torah itself. The Torah does talk about a case of due to human intervention, a miscarriage occurring, or in a sense, a fetus being aborted. It's in Shemos, v'chi natsu anashim, if if two people are in the middle of some kind of a terrible fight, they're skirmishing with each other, and in the course of their conflict, physical fight, they attacked a pregnant woman. Somehow she got into the middle of this melee over here, and velo ason, but nothing happened to the woman. But she miscarried, but nothing happened to the woman. So she is punished. Torah doesn't say how. She's punished the way the husband of this woman will demand in court, will place upon the aggressor in court. But v'im ason if God forbid something happens to the woman, then v'nasato nefesh tachas nefesh. Then there's a life for a life. So the Torah clearly is distinguishing between the unborn, the fetus, and the born, and a live person who is functioning. And Rashi explains a little more. We don't have to go into all the details, that this is a case when the two people are fighting with each other. They had no intent of hurting this woman, but she somehow inadvertently was a victim of their fight. And Anosh Onesh, what is the punishment? So Rashi quotes from the Torah Shabbal Peh, l'shalem demei v'lados labal. You have to pay the value of the fetuses. How you figure out value is an entirely different issue, but it's a monetary payment. On the other hand, im ason, if something happens to the woman, Rashi goes on to say, v'nasaton nefesh tachas nefesh. I'm going to try to see if I can, just so you can see where I am. I'll sort of see if I can circle it. No, I don't know exactly how. Oh, there it goes. No, okay, I don't know how to do this. All right. So v'nosata nefesh tachas nefesh, and that is that we, according to some, the aggressor gets capital punishment for murder. because he murdered this woman. There's a dispute about that because since they didn't intend to kill her, whether there is capital punishment or isn't. But you see clearly that there's a difference between the fetus, between the born and the unborn, and that is probably the reason for the next statement of which we're going to see here, which is a Mishnah in Ohalos. This is number 2 on the source sheet. Now it's interesting that as you'll see throughout this entire presentation, neither the Torah, and we really saw it was the only reference in the Torah that we saw was over here, and in the Torah Shebaal Peh, in the oral Torah, and in the Talmud, in the other rabbinic texts, do we have a clear demarcation of when life actually begins. And that's what makes this, in a sense, so fascinating and so difficult to arrive at a clear-cut conclusion as to what the Torah position is. But the Mishnah in Ohalos says the following: number 2, ha'isha shehi makasha leleid, a woman who is in labor. And in the course of being in labor, she's having difficulty. She's laboring with difficulty, and the baby's not coming out. So mechatchin es havlad b'mei'eha. If her life is in danger, and she's in labor and nothing is happening, we have to destroy the fetus. Mechatchin es havlad b'mei'eha umotzian osay varim evarim. You have to take it out bit by bit. Because her life, the mother's life, comes before the life of this unborn baby. But yotza rubo, if most of the baby is born, ein nogin bo she'ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh. If most of the baby is born, then the baby is considered halachically to have been born. Then the baby is the same as the mother. They're two human beings, and our general principle is that you can never murder one to save another one. So if the baby has been born and is still endangering the life of the mother, we can't do anything at that time. Ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh. Okay. Source number 3. Now, just by the way, if anyone has questions and you want to send them in on a chat, if I'm able to, I'll answer them. If they'll probably be sent to me by the moderator, and I'll be able to answer your questions if they're relevant to what I'm discussing. Otherwise, I'll try and leave time at the end if anybody has any other questions for that as well. Okay, so fine. So we see this now. That was a Mishnah. The Gemara, the Talmud, which is the later, which is the rabbinic commentary on the Mishnah itself. The Mishnah again was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi somewhere around the year 250 of the Common Era. The Talmud was then written with over a few hundred years, probably compiled somewhere roughly around the year 500 of the Common Era, and it's the authoritative commentary and explanation of the Mishnah. Okay, so the Talmud in Sanhedrin says, Amar Rav Huna, Katan harodef nitan lahatzilo benafsho. Okay, this is a side point, but it's just as by way of introduction to what we're talking about. That if you have a young person below the age of bar or bas mitzvah, so they're not legally responsible for their actions, if they are endangering someone else's life, you are still permitted to, if the only way possible to save the victim is by killing them, then you have to do it. That's the normal principle of rodef. If person A is putting person B in danger, it's putting their life in danger, person A is allowed to be killed if there's no other way to stop person A from what he or she is trying to do. Okay, so the Gemara says Loshna Gadol, Loshna Katan. It makes no difference if the person is an adult or a child. Now, so Eisve Rav Chisda Rav Huna. So Rav Chisda asks Rav Huna a question. We just said in the previous source that Yotza Rosho, actually it said Yotza Rubo, but it's the same idea because if the head comes out, it's like the baby is born also. When the baby is born, Einokimo, we cannot touch or hurt the baby, even though the baby is still endangering the mother. But the baby is putting the mother's life in danger because the baby, by virtue of the difficult labor, even though he's born, but he's still putting the mother's life in danger. So why could you not kill the baby as as if a katan can be a rodef. So answers the Gemara, Shani Hasam. That's different. The Mishmaya Karatfila, the baby isn't doing anything. Not that the baby is threatening someone's life with a gun, with a knife, or is doing something reckless. No, the baby is doing absolutely nothing. It's purely passive. It's the labor process that is threatening the mother's life, and that the baby has no control over. The baby is merely an object in the hands of God. Mishmaya Karatfila. The Radifa, the threat to the mother's life is coming from heaven, or as the Rambam puts it, it's coming from Tivo Shalom, from natural causes, from purely natural causes, from the process of giving birth. The process of labor is what's killing her. It's not the fetus. It's not the fetus or the born baby at all. So that's why the baby is not called a rodef. Bear this in mind, because later on, if we have time, we're going to see the very, very problematic and enigmatic position of Maimonides in this regard. Now, so Rashi explains what is the difference. Why is it that when the baby is in utero or not born yet, then we can kill the baby to save the mother? Once the baby has been born, we cannot. That seems to indicate that there's a transformation at the time of birth, and indeed that's what Rashi says in explaining this. He says, "Kolzman shelo yotza la'avir ha'olam." I'm reading the second in source number 3. I'm reading the second piece, Rashi. Kolzman shelo yotza la'avir ha'olam. As long as the fetus has not been born, has not come out into the air, lav nefeshu. He's not a life. He is not a life. Venitan lahargo, so you can still kill it to save the mother. Aval yatsa rosha, but once the head has come out, once the baby has been born, hava yakalari, he's born, and then he's born, he's a nefesh. So Rashi seems to say that the unborn child is not a life. That would be that life begins at birth. Okay, that would seem to be what Rashi is saying. And indeed, this is echoed by one of the commentators on the Shulchan Aruch, the Smad of Me'iras, named Rabbi Yoshua Falk, Katz, in his commentary to Choshen Mishpat, says the same thing. Shekol shelo yotza la'avir ha'olam ein shame nefesh alav. He is not viewed as being a life. And the reason for that is the haraya, the proof for that is the very first text that we saw. The hanogef ishahara, if you attack a pregnant woman, the yatsu yiladeha, and she miscarries, mishalim demei velados, you pay for the value of the children. Ve'ein shame rotseach umisa alav. He is not labeled as a murderer, and he does not have capital punishment. Were that fetus viewed as a life, then the murderer, then the one who killed it, would be a murderer. And the pasuk doesn't say that. The pasuk says there's merely a financial payment to be given. So we see that again. The Sma is echoing Rashi's commentary, and what the Sma is doing is he's putting together the first two sources. He's showing you that the Torah is indeed the what drove the Mishnah in Alos to make the statement that there's a difference between being born and not being born. Okay. Now, how do I get to the next page over here? It's not scrolling down. Ah, there it is at the bottom. Okay, there it is. Okay, fine. Thank you. I see now how to do it. Okay. Now let's move to slightly this. I caution this is a little bit unpleasant, as many of the things. Well, the whole subject we're discussing is unpleasant. It's not a pleasant thing to have to discuss and deal with. Okay, as you see, it's labeled number 4. Can we execute a pregnant woman? And the Mishnah says in Erchin that ha'isha sheyotza lehareg, if a woman has been convicted of a crime which carries a punishment of capital of death, and she's been sentenced, she has the death sentence, and she's being taken out to be executed. Ein mamtinin la'achateilet. If she is pregnant, we do not wait until she has the baby, but she is executed together with, and even though that means that the unborn baby will perish as a result, it doesn't. So be it. So be it. But on the other hand, ha'isha sheyoshva al hamashber, if the woman is already in labor, in active labor, mamtinin la ad sheteled, then we wait and we will not execute the mother until she gives birth. And the Gemara comments now on the first part, the part that we don't wait before labor, that if during pregnancy we don't wait, pshita, this is obvious, gufahi, the fetus is part of her body. So why should we wait? So the Gemara says, it's Tarich. No, we still need it because I might have thought, going back to that very first pasuk that we saw, that the husband brings the perpetrator to court and demands to be paid for the fetuses, that we see that the husband has a financial, so to speak, right into the fetuses as well. So therefore, maybe we have no right to take that away from him. Kamashra, that's not a consideration over here. And the Gemara says, well, why not? Why isn't it? Because the pasuk says, "V'meisu gam shnehem l'rabos es havlad," that they both die. The Torah uses a language "meisu gam shnehem," and therefore that includes an unborn fetus as well. And includes an unborn fetus as well. But then the Gemara says, so what about Yoshva al Hamashber? Once she's in labor, why is it different? And answers the Gemara, since the fetus has already started moving, it moved out of the uterus or partially out of the uterus into the birth canal. So it is now a separate being. And if it's a separate being, that's why you have to wait. So this is already complicates matters considerably, because before we saw this source over here, number 4, we seem to have had a clear-cut definition of the fetus before birth and after birth. Before birth, it was not a nefesh, in the words of Rashi, it was not a life, but after birth, it is a life. Now we see that there's an additional factor. There's the process in between. There's something in between. There's a period of time when the fetus is already traveling out of the uterus, but not yet born. And so for this halacha, we say we will wait to execute the mother till this fetus is born. We'll treat the fetus like it's separate. Yet, if you remember the previous case, we still, even though the woman is in active labor, if the child has not yet been born, we will kill that child to save the mother. So there we treat the fetus no differently when it's in utero or when it's in the birth canal. Here we see there's a difference, and it's not clear why. It's not clear why there should be this difference. Okay, so that's what we have now. We see, so that's part of the issue here, as I mentioned, that some of the sources themselves lend themselves to ambiguity, and it's hard to tell exactly what is involved. Okay, now we'll move on to another issue, and we'll see that there's obviously, as you see from the before, even though it's talking about something different, you see how it's related to the one before and how it contrasts with the one before. Here also, we have a apparently different topic, but you'll see how it's all related. And this is violating Shabbat to save a fetus. Is one permitted to be machal? We know that we are permitted to be machal Shabbos to save human life. That we know. Question is, what about a fetus? And again, if a fetus is not human life, it's not a nefesh, maybe not. So let's see what the Talmud says here. So, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Ha'isha hayotza lehoreg. If a woman is again being executed, this is the same story we had before. Let's see. Okay, so the first part of the Gemara is really not that relevant for our discussion. It's talking about who who dies first. Does the mother die first? Does the fetus die first? That's not so important for our situation. What's really more important is towards the bottom of this, in this source number 5, about 4 or 5 lines from the end. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Ha'isha sheyoshva al hamashber, a woman who is in labor, umesa b'Shabbos, and she passes away in labor on Shabbos. Now, she passes away, but the fetus, the baby, is still alive. Mevian sakin the umakarines kresa umotzienes havlad. We will do a post-mortem C-section in order to save the child, to save the fetus. So the Gemara says, Pshita, of course you can do that. My Ovid. That's not even Chilul Shabbos, because if the woman has already passed away, she's no longer alive. So opening her up is not an act of there's no malacha. It's not killing anyone. You can't kill a dead person. So there's no one of the 39 prohibited labors is not involved in doing this post-mortem C-section. So there's nothing wrong. So the Gemara says, no, Amar Rabba, lo nitzracha. We're talking about lahavi sakin derech rishos haram. You could even carry a knife through the street to do it. Carrying a knife is forbidden activity on Shabbos, and therefore, what we see is that you can be machal Shabbos to save this fetus, even though, again, we're carrying a knife through the street. That's chilul Shabbos to save this fetus. So the Gemara says, Umay Kamashwan, what is this teaching us? To misfeka machalalinon Shabbata, that when we're not sure, because we don't know if we can save the fetus, you're allowed to be machal Shabbos. Well, we know that anyway. We know that anyway. So the Gemara says we know that because we have cases of people who are under collapsed buildings, and the Gemara says in Yuma we will remove all the rubble, even though that is Chilul Shabbos, Chilul Yom Kippur. We'll remove all the rubble in order to, even though we don't know if anyone is alive, even if there's a chance someone is alive, we're Machal Shabbos. So why do we have to tell us over here that you can be Machal Shabbos? So the Gemara says, no, Mahu the same, Hasam hu da chazaka de chiyusa. In that case, those are people who were definitely alive, and now we don't know if they're dead or not. But this is a fetus. This fetus never was established as being a live person. So therefore, maybe we're not permitted to, if we're not sure if we can save it, maybe we shouldn't do anything. Kamash malan, that we that we can. That we can. Now, again, this statement is very interesting because it doesn't say that I might have thought you can't save it because it's not a life yet. That's what one would have expected, perhaps, the Gemara to have said. The Gemara asks, what's the big chiddush that you can say? We know that you can save lives. The Gemara could have answered, well, we don't know if this is a life. Maybe this is not a life. It's not born yet. But this is, again, a case where the woman is in labor, right? She was in labor. So maybe that, again, since the fetus has moved a little bit, maybe such a case is considered to be alive. So again, it heightens our ambiguity with regard to this. Now, this discussion continued, and now we're going to move to a later source. This is already post-Talmudic. Till now, everything we've dealt with has been, except for the comment of Rashi. Rashi is post-Talmudic also. He's a commentator on the Talmud. But other than that, everything else we've done has really been Talmudic. No, I take it back again. We did the Sma, the Meira Senaim, who was a later commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, on the Code of Jewish Law. Okay, so I take that back. I should. But now we're also dealing with a later commentator, the Ramban, Nachmanides, a medieval commentator in Spain, 12th century, 12th to 13th century. So Nachmanides, who was one of our major authorities, towering figure in the medieval period, he quotes an earlier source, the Halachos Gedolos, that's a Gaonic source, that Isha Ubara, this is talking about the Gemara says that a woman who's pregnant on Yom Kippur, if she has a craving for a particular food where she really is an intense craving, let's call it, and they assume that I don't think today we have exactly that situation. Today, normally, if women are pregnant and then there's some kind of an issue, they eat. It has nothing to do with their craving. It's more for other factors that they may have to eat. But in those days, they assume that if a woman has this intense craving, it could be dangerous for her if she doesn't eat. So she's allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. Isha ubara di adinan di ilo achla. If she doesn't eat misaker vlada, she may miscarry the fetus. So af agav da amrinan safek ben chayamahu safek nefel. Even though we don't know for sure if this fetus is going to live anyway, but still, shaper dani lameitanla. We can still give her food to eat. And Rav Yitzchak ben Geyos amar lav biyadiya didan talya milsa ela biyadida dida. It goes by what if she feels she needs it. Okay, so they discuss the some of the criteria for how you know whether this woman really needs to eat or not. Okay, but then the Ramban goes on and says, well, what about if it's only a danger for the fetus and not for the mother? The mother is going to live and be well, even if she doesn't eat. But it's the fetus who will suffer or will not make it if we don't feed it, feed the woman. So the Ramban says that afilu leka lemechash. Now afilu ro osa misavel osa reach. Okay, that's about that's the same thing. Shmami na afilu leka lemechash ledida v'chalul enolaha. Okay, Amar Rav Nachman, he quotes our Gemara. The Gemara we had Isha sheyashva al hamashper umeisa b'Shabbos meviyin sakin umakarin es kreisa. He quotes that Gemara that you're allowed to be mechal Shabbos for the fetus. So we see from here that for a fetus you could be machalel Shabbos. Okay, so he says, but on the other hand, there is another Gemara which we're going to see in a moment that dafka ben yom echad, that only a child who is a day old is considered to be someone who we really save. Now we'll go to the next page and we'll see that source now. Yeah, okay. This is let's see. This is what I wanted. No. No. All right, we better just stay where we were, otherwise I'll. How do I get? Oh, there it is. I have to get back to where I was. Okay. So let's just continue with the statement. We'll come to it. We'll come to it afterwards. So he's quoting again two different opinions, whether or not, in other words, is it only if we think the mother will die if we don't give her to eat on Yom Kippur, or even if the mother will be fine, it's just the fetus who will die? That's what the Ramban here at the end quotes two opinions about. Tanan Nami, yeah, okay. V'dafka ben yom echad aval ubar lo ukron nami dichsev demishlam demei vlodos demishalim demei vlodos. You only pay for the money for the death of the fetus, as we saw before. Okay. Nonetheless, says the Ramban, afilu hachi le'inyan shmiras mitzvos mechalalin aleha. Because in order to observe mitzvos, we could be mechalel. Amra Torah chalel olav Shabbos achas shema yishmar Shabbos harbe. So the Ramban invokes a very interesting principle that the Gemara, when the Gemara discusses the whole question of why we're permitted to desecrate the Sabbath or any other law to save a life, the final conclusion of the Gemara is that it's based on a verse in the Torah, "V'chai bohem," that the mitzvahs are given to us to live by the mitzvahs. But in the course of its discussion, the Gemara had suggested another possibility. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael Shabbos. It is the obligation of the Jewish nation as a whole to observe the Shabbos, not just any particular Shabbos, but the concept of Shabbos in general. And that means that even if you have a situation where you might have to temporarily be Mechal Shabbos, but that will ensure that a person will live to observe many other Shabbosos, we should do that. And therefore, says the Ramban, in this case too, this fetus maybe is not a life, but the fetus will develop into a human being who will be able to observe Shabbos. So that's reason enough to save the fetus. So that's the first thing. That's what the Ramban suggests over here. And then he says, Ika desvirle, others hold, she'ein machalel mishum nefalim. No, we will not desecrate Shabbos to save the unborn child, because the unborn child is not yet a life. Is not yet a life. Only the mother. Only the mother. And he leaves it in the end as he says, Safek nefashos lahakel, since we're not sure, we will save the life of a fetus. That is the conclusion of the Ramban. So the Ramban presents from the Gaonim two different opinions as to whether one can or can't save the life of the fetus. But again, it appears from the Ramban that the fetus is not a full life, and that's why he's not sure what the justification for being Machal Shabbos is. And he comes on to this Chalel of Shabbosos Harbe. Okay, now another issue. What is the punishment for destroying a fetus? Now, what do we mean by that? We already saw that the punishment was a monetary punishment. But the Gemara here presents it again. The Talmud, the Mishnah presents it as a contrast between born and unborn, and it could be instructive for us. Tinok ben yom echad, a baby, a day-old baby, is treated like a full grown person for a number of different halachas in terms of tuma, okay, and in terms of other rules. And the last one is, which is important for us, um, um, if someone will kill that baby, they will be subject to capital punishment for killing a human being. And the Talmud comments on this as well. That let's see, the Talmud. Let's see. Then we have to go to the next page. Yes, I'm sorry, not the Talmud. The Tosfos over there discuss this at detail. So it's the clear implication of the Talmud is that it's only when the baby is a day old that there's capital punishment. Again, reinforcing what it says in the Torah. That the Torah says that before that there's only a monetary punishment to be paid. Okay, now Tosfos over here has a discussion about saving the life of the fetus, etc. About the mother with the when the fetus is endangering the mother and all of that. And Tosfos makes a very interesting point that let's see where we can start over here. Where Isha Hamakasha, I'm reading where it says in bold letters, Daf Mem Daled Amud Beis, a little bit before that. Isha Makasha, a woman who's in labor and having difficulty, we know Chotech Aver, we cut the fetus up. In other words, we'll kill the fetus to save the mother. But Yotza Rosho, once the fetus is born, Ein Dochin Nefesh Mipnei Nefesh, we will no longer do anything to the fetus. Miu Efshar, maybe, Dehecha Di'imo Chaya, Lo Mechayev HaHargo, Ad Sheyetze Rosho, Shatoli imo. Maybe that's only true when the mother is alive. Aval hecha de mesa. But if the mother has already passed away, in the case we gave before, and the fetus is still alive, then maybe if you murder the fetus at that point, chayev, even though it's still a fetus. Why? Mishum de kamunach bekufsadami. Since its mother is no longer alive, all it is just like in a box. It's like trapped in the flesh of a dead person. That's like being alive, almost in a nightmare, like buried alive, but the fetus is still alive, and therefore that is not the same thing. To be Machal Shabbos to save that fetus is not the same thing as being Machal Shabbos to save a fetus that's an alive woman. In other words, what the Tosfos are trying to explain is how could anyone question if the Talmud says clearly that if you have the woman who's passed on and we're allowed to be Machal Shabbos to save the baby, that should indicate that there's no question that we save the life of a fetus. Why, therefore, did we see a debate about it before, whether you could be Machal Shabbos to save the life of a fetus? So the Tosfos are explaining there's a difference between if the mother is alive or the mother is dead. The mother is alive, the fetus is subordinate to the mother. If the mother is dead, there's nothing to be subordinate to, so the fetus is alive. So what the Tosfos are saying is, in a sense, that when a baby is born, the reason that it's considered now to be alive and there's capital punishment is because it's no longer subordinate to anything else. It becomes independent. It achieves independence at that moment. That's what makes it a life. Beforehand, it has no independence whatsoever. That's what the Tosfos suggests as a possibility. Now, the Im Tomar, Im Timtsalomar, the Kamunach, Kedemuchach Bebarakama de Erchin. I'm sorry, I just skipped a line. Im Timtsalomar, the Mutar Lahargo Bebeten. If you will claim that it is permitted, therefore, normally to kill a fetus in utero because it's not yet a life. Now, nobody ever said anything about it being permitted to do it. We only talked about the difference in punishment, whether there's a monetary punishment. Tosfos now is making an astounding statement. Im Tim Salomar, the mutar lahargo bebetan, that you are permitted to kill the fetus in utero. So afilu mesa imo, even if the mother died, well, that's then would be a question whether we say this idea. But amai mechalel in alavas Shabbos. So then, why would you ever be allowed to be mechalel Shabbos if you could actually murder the fetus? So then, why are you allowed to be mechalel Shabbos? And so they answer, Yesh lama demikamakom mishum pikuach nefesh mechalel in avas Shabbos afagav demot lahargo. Now that statement appears to make absolutely no sense. How could it be that we are so concerned about the life of this fetus that we will do anything we can to save it, including being Mechalel Shabbos in terms of every Avera, right? We'll do. Yet, on the other hand, you're allowed to kill it. That makes sense. How could you be allowed to kill it if you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos to save it? So this statement appears to make absolutely no sense. It could be that Tosfos is saying a variation of what the Ramban says, that it's because there are other considerations in Pikuach Nefesh, like Chalal of Shabbos Achaz Kadeshe Yishmar Shabbosos Harbe, that we are, it's not that the fetus is a life. It may not be a life, but still saving it will allow it to have a life and to live a Jewish life and to observe Shabbos. That's why we can save it. But still, it's very hard to understand. So the question is, and this Tosfos, this statement of Tosfos that seems to be again absolutely mind-boggling, that it should actually be permitted to destroy a fetus. Should that be taken literally? Should the line in the above Tosfos be taken literally? And that's a whole there's a whole literature on that, and I've just quoted here a little bit of the sampling of that literature here. Okay, and first of all, it's worth noting that there are other statements of Tosfot. The same Tosfot, the same Tosafist rabbis who, on the one hand, in Maseches Nida made this astounding statement, in other places in the Talmud, they appeared to say otherwise. So we have a Tosfos in Sanhedrin. Tosfos in Sanhedrin is discussing a very interesting concept, which is, we will see this in a little while, that the law of abortion may be different for Jews and for non-Jews. Paradoxically, it may be stricter for non-Jews than it is for Jews from a halachic perspective. But the Talmud says that it is impossible for there to be anything which is prohibited for non-Jews and permitted for Jews. Jews are always, everything is stricter for us, right? There's nothing that's we're allowed to do that non-Jews are not allowed to do. So in the course of that discussion, Tosfos makes the statement, he's talking about this issue of ubarim, but what about fetuses? Because we'll see what the law is for non-Jews. The Oved Kachavim Chayev, that if a non-Jew kills a fetus, he is subject to capital punishment, and Yisrael Potter. We'll see the Gemara in a little while. Af Agav the Potter, it says Tosfos, even though you're exempt, but Mikamakom Lo Shari, but it's not permitted. No one ever said you're permitted to kill a fetus. So it is not stricter for non-Jews. It may be that the punishment is different, but it's still a crime. It's a crime for Jews as well. So here the Tosfos explicitly say that you cannot destroy an unborn fetus. Now, the fact that a Tosfos in Nida and a Tosfos in Sanhedrin may say different things is not a problem, because the Baalei HaTosfos were a group of many rabbis over about a 200-year period in Western Europe, in France and Germany, period of 200 years. And throughout that time, they were writing commentaries, and these commentaries were edited by different people. And so the Tosfot we have on every given tractate of the Talmud don't always match those on another tractate of the Talmud, because they could have had different editors. They could have had different editors. So the fact that the Tosfos say one thing in one place and another is nothing, it just represents different points of view. We can't use that necessarily to prove that this Tosfos is incorrect or that it misrepresents something. Just the fact that we have another Tosfos. However, this question is this first Tosfos that actually makes the statement twice, in that it is mutar to destroy a fetus. Is that to be taken literally? Did they really mean it? Did they really mean it? So one view is yes, yes, and that's the view of the Maritz Chius, Rav Tzvi Hirsch Chayes of 19th century Central Europe in Slovakia. He was a great great authority, and he wrote many Svarim. He has comments on every tractate of Talmud, and he says, "Ulam midivrei Tosfos kan mashma demutar lechatchila." From the words of Tosfos here, it sounds like it is permitted to destroy a fetus. And he says, "V'dad," he's quoting now someone else, the Beis Yaakov. The sof divrei Tosfos tmuim bioser. The end of Tosfos is even more astounding. That we saw as well. That on the one hand he says you could kill it, but on the other hand you could be mechal Shabbos to save it. That seems to make absolutely no sense. Okay, so this is one view that the Tosfos ought to be taken literally. Again, whether we will follow it is another entirely different issue. But they meant what they said. At least some rabbis hold that opinion. Then we have a second view that yes, they meant it, but it's impossible to accept such a thing. Even if they meant it, we can't accept it. And this seems to be the view of the Achiezer. The Achiezer is Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski of pre-war Vilna. He was the authority for pre-war Eastern European Jewry, and in a sense, maybe world Jewry as well. Reb Chaim Ozer was just the outstanding authority of his time, and he's quoting again this Tosfos, "Shakasu demutar laharog es ha'ubar," that you're permitted to kill the fetus. The patur ala ubar shamanu. We've heard we can accept the view that one might not get punished for doing it, but mutar lo shamanu, that it should be permitted. We've never heard anyone say that. The emes tamua biyoser. So this is very surprising. Very surprising. Very much like what the Beis Yaakov said. That this, so they're accepting it that the Tosfos said it, but they're saying that it's very difficult to accept such a thing. That you can't really make sense of this kind of a view. That's what Rav Chaim Ozer suggests. So he's taking the Tosfos literally, but he's saying it can't really be accepted. On the other hand, another authority was slightly lived a little bit before Rav Chaim Ozer, the Beis Yitzchak, Rav Yitzchak Shmelkus of Lvov. Lviv, as they call it now, Lemberg. It was known in those days as Lemberg. He lived. This tshuva, you see, was written in Tafresh and Gimel, which is 1893. 1893. He lived just about before. I don't know whether he made it. Yeah, he did. He made it into the 20th century, late 19th, very early 20th century. So the question actually is a very sad question, but it's very relevant. A woman who's in labor, and the fetus says the head has already come out. So we saw the halacha that if the head has already come out, you cannot no longer kill the fetus to save the mother. But he says in this case, if we are going to do nothing, they're both going to die. They will both die. So what's the halacha then? And he goes on and goes into depth about that case. What about if they're both going to die? What do you do then? I don't really understand. I don't think medically that really would happen, but you never know. I don't know. I guess it could. It could be. But anyway, so in the course of his discussion, he says the low could the Tosfos neither. Don't assume like what the Tosfos wrote, the mutar laharog. Does shigra delishna? The Tosfos just used that language. It was an inexact expression on their part. They never meant it. They never meant it to be taken literally. The asur midaraisa, it is biblically prohibited. They just meant that it's putter. Sometimes the word putter, that you're exempt from capital punishment if you do it, and mutter sometimes could be confused a little bit. So they really didn't mean that it is permissible. They merely meant that you're not culpable with capital punishment. Okay. And finally, we have another view that also says that this is a mistake in the Tosfos, a scribal error, printing error, whatever one will want to call it. It is it shouldn't be there in the Tosfos. And this is the view of Igros Moshe Rav Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein claimed that this is totally untenable. Like as you see, pretty much everyone is expressing surprise at this view. And he therefore says, "Ve'ein litos, do not be fooled. Miloshan atosus nida, shekosvu shnei pa'amim, Lashon mutar lahaga. Don't be confused by that language. The pashit ubarur shahu ta'us sofer. It is clear that it is a printing or again a scribal error. The tzarich ligros, and you have to read imtim tzalama the potter, that you're exempt, not that it's mutar. And again he says vahu ta'us sofer hanikar. This is an obvious ta'us sofer. The hamaske lahave raya Mikoses be the Adam again. It says it can't be Ella Muchrachin Lomar again. Shautos Sofer, and then he goes on again. Umatsasi Bahagos ha. Rav Yavetz, Rav Yaakov Emden. Rav Yaakov Emden was from a few centuries earlier, um, in the 18th century. Shakasav Eno Meduyak Lashon Demutar Lahargo. He wrote, it's not exact language, right? Also, it shouldn't be taken literally. Demanu deshari, no one would permit it, belitam, without any good reason. Af agav de'ein nerag olav, even though you may not get capital punishment. And again, he says, Ella who toes sofer me'ezematik, someone who copied. In other words, in the pre-printing days, when the Tosfos were copied by hand from one Talmud, from one student to another, someone made a mistake and put that. Now it's a very interesting idea. This idea of ascribing something, some difficult view to a scribal error. Rav Moshe Feinstein does it a number of times in his writings. Whenever he comes up with something that to him appears totally implausible, he will often say that it is a toes sofer. Now, normally, in order to say that something is a scribal error, you have to have some kind of supporting evidence, like a document that reads that way, or or something of that sort. That would allow you. You find an alternate, a manuscript that has that in it, just on your own, to say that something. But it could be that this is just Rav Moshe's way of saying we don't, even if the Tosha said it, we can't follow it. Maybe it's a polite way of saying, like the others say, this is just a totally untenable position. We see though that the consensus pretty much is that this is this is a rather untenable position. Now, the next source, let's see, next one. Yeah, the culpability of non-Jews. This is what I mentioned earlier before, that there appears to be at least one view in the Talmud that the laws of abortion are stricter for non-Jews than they are for Jews. Ben Noach Neherag, a non-Jew is subject to capital punishment. There are all kinds of criteria given over here. And Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Amru Af al Ha'ubarim, even for feticide, even for the killing of a fetus, there is capital punishment. And where does that come from? And the Gemara quotes the pasuk. Here it is. Shofeich dam. My Tama de Rabbi Yishmael. Why does Rabbi Yishmael say af al ha'ubarim? It seems to be only the view of Rabbi Yishmael, even on fetuses. Where does he get it? Shofeich dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafeich. If you spill the blood of a person in a person, what is a person in a person? That's a fetus. A fetus is a person in a person. So we see that the Torah is considering the fetus to be a person, according to Rabbi Yishmael, and you kill the fetus, you've killed a person in a person, and therefore you are subject to capital punishment. Damo yishafech. Your life, should be taken as well. Ezo adam shahu ba'adam, who is a person in another person. Heve omer ze ubar shebemei imo. That's a fetus inside its mother. And the Tanakama. But what about the Tanakama, the other view? That's only the view of Rabbi Yishmael. Evidently, the other rabbis didn't accept this view that there's capital punishment for non-Jews for abortion. So, what is their position? Tana Dve Menashehu, the Amar, Kol Misa Ha'amura Livnei Noach Eino Elachena, that the punishment that non-Jews, the way when they have to be executed, they're executed through strangulation. That's one of the four forms of capital punishment that we have. And they learn it from Dam Adam Ba'adam, that the way, the type of death, which is a person with his own, through his own body, is strangulation, meaning there's nothing external that penetrates or that causes the death. It's really the person himself no longer able to breathe. So that's called Adam Ba'adam. That's the way he understands the pasuk. So it's referring to the mode of death that we give for capital punishment, not who did the murdering. And so therefore there's a dispute as how to learn this pasuk. So we see that the view of Rabbi Yishmael is that non-Jews have a stricter, that they have a bigger punishment, for a more severe punishment, I should say, for feticide than Jews do. But again, the view of the other rabbis is that there's no difference. Evidently, they don't accept it. So the question is, does Rabbi Yishmael? It sounds like he's saying that if he is a life, because if it's not a life, then how can a non-Jew be killed for killing something that's not a life? And it's Adam ba'Adam. Maybe the Chachamim disagree with that. Maybe this is part of the dispute. Maybe one could say that the dispute between the other rabbis and Rabbi Yishmael is the fetus a life or is it not a life? But we had all those other sources that also um, uh, we had some contradictory indications from them. Um, oh, okay. So somebody has just posed a question on the chat. Why is this pasuk referring specifically to non-Jews? A very good question. This pasuk is written in Parshas Noach, after Noach emerged from the ark with his family. They survived the flood, and there the Torah gives a number of new rules. One of which is shofeich dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafeich ki b'tselem elokim asa'is ha'adam. So that was given to Noach. As such, it represents a Noahide law, because we say that the laws that applied to Jews, they were sort of repeated at Sinai later on again. Anything that was said before Sinai often is referring only to Noahides. So that's why that pasuk would specifically apply to non-Jews, because it was directed to Noach. Okay, I hope that answers the question. Fine. Let me summarize. I don't think we're going to get number 9 would take us considerably more than the 5 minutes that we have left. So rather than try and spread ourselves too thin, what I would like to do now for the last few minutes, again, if anybody has any questions on the chat, I would entertain them as well. But I would like to do is just summarize what we haven't see what this all means, what the implications of all this are. So we see, in a sense, that there is clearly a one way of reading these sources that indicates that the unborn child is not a life, is not a fetus, is not a fetus, is not a life. On the other hand, there are other indications, there are contrary indications, such as certainly the view of Rabbi Yishmael. And then there's also the fact, again, if Chilul Shabbos is permitted for a fetus, that would seem to indicate it is a life, because otherwise, how can there be pikuach nefesh for something that is not a nefesh? And that seems to be. So, based on this, there really are and have been for many years divergent views as to what the issue, what the avera of abortion is. There are those who take, let's say, what I think is probably often has been presented as the normative Jewish view, is that it's murder. That it's murder. And this is indeed was the view of Rav Moshe Feinstein and many others who held that it is considered to be like murder, and therefore the only time it's permitted is what the Talmud says, when the mother's life is in danger. And that's it. Otherwise, there's never any justification for abortion. That we can call the hard line or the strict view. On the other hand, there's another view that has been espoused over the past few centuries, and today, and not today, but in the 20th century, the primary holder of that view was Rav Eliezer Waldenberg, who was a member of the Beis Din Hagadol in Yerushalayim, the chief rabbinate's high court, and also was the posek for Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. So he really dealt a lot with with these kind of issues. He has a much more permissible. He claims based on all these that it's not murder, not murder. So why is it prohibited? But it's prohibited. It's prohibited because it is considered either rabbinically prohibited, or it is considered to be like wasting seed, or it is damaging. It is wounding oneself, damaging oneself. So therefore, whenever there's a strong pressing need, whether it's the mental health of the mother, or whether it is uh, something along those lines, it would be permitted. So he takes a much more liberal view on this. Now, somebody's asking here about Plan B, the morning after pill. Okay, morning after pill is probably, as far as I understand it, not in the realm of abortion at all, because it is taken so soon. Um, it's taken it's very likely it's taken even before conception, even if it's after conception, but it is at that point. A fertilized egg is probably not considered an embryo till it adheres to the lining of the uterus. Whether it occurred the day after intercourse, it's probably highly unlikely. But at that stage, there are anyway many views that the first 40 days are different. We didn't even have a chance to get into that whole issue of the first 40 days being different. But a pill like that operates so soon, probably before conception or very soon after conception, I think the consensus of opinion is that that would not be in the realm of abortion. And again, where there's a pressing need for it, it would be it would be permitted. So I believe so. But again, I'm not here to paskin any questions. You have to go to your own local Orthodox rabbi if you have particular psukim. I'm only giving a general overview of the issue. So I think our time is up now at this point. And um, again, a case of rape, that I see that was the end of the question. It would probably, again, I think the consensus would be permitted, but again, one would have to consult with one's own authority. Okay. So I would just end, if I have a moment, to end with the following story that I heard many years ago from Rav Yeshaya Neuwirth, the author of the Shmiras Shabbos Kilchasa, who was a student of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, like Rav Moshe Feinstein, held that abortion was murder, and he did not permit it except to save the life of the mother. However, sometimes when he would get questions like this, he would say, "Why ask me? Go and ask Rabbi Waldenberg," because he knew that Rabbi Waldenberg would give a more lenient answer. So somebody asked him, "Rav Auerbach, but you consider it to be murder. If you consider it to be murder, why are you sending people to Rabbi Waldenberg?" To which Rav Shlomo Zalman replied, and this was so much anyone who knew Rav Shlomo Zalman and his whole character. Um, he said, "Look, many of these questions border on pikuach nefesh, because the mother could get so depressed if there are difficulties with the child, and it could lead to pikuach nefesh. But it's very hard. How can I decide what is and what isn't pikuach nefesh? We don't have. So if Rav Waldenberg is willing to take the achrayus and to take the and to justify it on his analysis of the sugya, let him do that." In other words, he had respect for the other point of view, tremendous respect for another great person. And in general, whenever we approach halacha, we should realize we should respect all the views on the spectrum. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, hopefully the Ribono Shel Olam will guide us in the right way to make the right decisions in this area, as well as all other areas of halacha. Good night to you all.